Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this showcase. My name is John Richardson. I'm the Manager for Knowledge Development for the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience, and I'm really delighted to be this host for this session to launch the Incident Management Handbook. But I want to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Bunurong people in the Kulin Nation here in Naarm, and acknowledge traditional custodians of the various lands on which you're all joining us from today, as well as any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are participating in this event. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and certainly celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples across the country, and their ongoing culture and connection to the lands and waters across Australia. Also, I want to recognise that this is Reconciliation Week, and so I think it's really important to reflect on what we can learn from the wisdom of people who've been living with fire, flood, cyclone, earthquake, volcanic activity, tsunami, disease and dispossession for 60,000 years. Our First Nations people embody what we mean by resilience. So I just want to, before we get into the guts of the showcase, there's a few things here in terms of the housekeeping. You'll find that you won't be able to speak, and your camera won't be able to be activated. Today's event's going to be recorded and will be made available after the event, so you can kind of watch it in the comfort of your own home in front of the fire. If you're going to ask questions, we ask you to use the Q&A function and not the chat box. By all means, use the chat box to have conversations about. But if you want a question to be asked to the panel, please use the Q&A function. But when we'll also ask you that when you are chatting and having conversations, and we hope that this does prompt a whole lot of discussion, just please be respectful to each other when using comments or questions. There's enough kind of hurt and nastiness in the way sometimes we conduct ourselves in online discussions. It doesn't have to be that way. We can all be professional and civil. So I'd just like you to remind you of that as well. We're hosting this webinar today to launch the new Incident Management Handbook, the associated quick guides, and a companion document of case studies. The Incident Management Handbook is part of the Australian Disaster Resilience Handbook collection, which aims to collate and present the best available practice so that people in the field don't feel like they're alone or that they need to reinvent the wheel, and can ultimately help the people who might just be help the people who might just be experiencing the worst day of their lives. This handbook helps reduce disaster risk. Its preparedness for effective response is a pillar of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and it also contributes to a number of the core capabilities in the Australian disaster preparedness framework that helps us manage catastrophic disasters. Incidents, by their very nature, messy, stressful, have significant uncertainty, and they leave people with limited time or not to make decisions. So if we're thinking systematically, that could have consequences both now and into the future. Incident management, though, provides us with a structure to give people time and space to make those decisions, and we're going to hear about that today through the case studies, as well as how we've sort of framed the handbook. I recall we think about incident management as being this kind of big thing that's usually in big centres with screens and lights that go bing. But a number of years ago, my dog was Archie was being looked after by a colleague, and as was his wont, he escaped, and this caused great stress in the office until our operations officer set up an incident management team to manage the search. He was eventually found, but I guess what it demonstrates in my head that there's no incidents too small to apply incident management principles. We've got three great speakers today to help us speak about these principles. So we have David Parsons, who is known to many of you. He's been around the sector for a significant amount of time. Never tire of hearing David speak about crisis and emergency management. We've got Muriel Leclercq, who's the principal for corporate incident management for Water Corporation in WA. So those of you in the West, give her your thanks for delivering your water. And we've got Colin Muller, who's the Business Resilience Manager for the ABC. So that certainly would be a challenging role. But I'm going to hand to David now to introduce the handbook as our writer, and how he kind of shaped the project and what's in the handbook. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, John. I appreciate you making the point of how old I am, and thank you for that one too. Look, first I'd like to thank AIDR for the great opportunity to be the author of this, my second handbook within the series. And I'd really like to thank the team who I worked with on this project, who's extremely great amount of knowledge, and made this project feasible to get such a good quality product out at the end. As you can see on this front slide and the photographs at the bottom, the key point about this handbook is that it's been produced not for the emergency services organisations who have their Australian Inter-Service Incident Management System Handbook 2017, but for all those other agencies and organisations who need to manage those days when there's a disruptive event, when there's a natural disaster, whether it be all sorts in their organisation. Next slide, please. So I just want to touch on this first one about the scope, what the handbook's designed to be and what it's not designed to be. We recognised in doing the handbook that we're currently in a world with high levels of VUCA context. That's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and of course, ambiguity. Whether that be from climate change, war, the supply chain problems we've had, COVID, etc., it just is endless, and it's not going to quiet down anytime soon. And so the need to have good incident management processes to cover all those possibilities is more important than ever. Secondly, a key point that it's not meant for the emergency services to have their own handbook, but it's meant as a handbook to guide businesses and organisations outside of that sector to have robust incident management processes in the place. And recognising that organisations in day-to-day business have existing business structures, and it's often about amendment or modification to that structure when there's an incident, not creating a whole new organisation, as might be suggested in the AIMS handbook. It's certainly not meant to be the handbook to cover multi-agency emergency operations centres or covering crisis management. Again, two specialty areas which are separate again. But what it is trying to do is to present a holistic incident management process so that an organisation who's either beginning the journey or checking how they're going on the journey can look at how it should look from front to back, recognising that good response starts way back with good preparedness, and hopefully good actual prevention means we don't have to use the response handbook or the response parts of the incident management process. And of course, our recovery processes at the end of that. So it is very much about the whole cycle of PPRR. We have used the term incident management team to generically represent whether it's an emergency management team or an emergency control team or many other terms different organisations use. We've used to use that as a generic terminology. And we recognise in this handbook that good incident management is a resilience builder, and that also recognising in the handbook, and you'll see a list of the many different international standards this handbook has to fit into. Handbooks covering business continuity, IT issues, health and safety, quality management all have to tie into what we've got here. So this is meant to be a handbook that can actually meet all those respective needs. Next slide, please. In creation of the handbook, we developed a set of guiding principles that would guide our thinking throughout the handbook. Some of these make a lot of sense without me probably needing to say too much, but obviously the first one, the importance of protecting life and reducing harm to persons. And of course, businesses have responsibilities even broader than that, but that's obviously one of those primacy ones. Recognising that for many organisations, we're building onto an existing organisational structure, onto existing organisational processes, not creating something separate. That's certainly one of the ones there. Risk-based, that here in Australia, all our work is based on a risk assessment and risk assessment processes. Recognising, though, that in a world of high VUCA context, there's always going to be things that the risk study hasn't covered, and therefore we'll be doing adaptive thinking when that actually happens. Recognising that any good sports team prepares beforehand, they don't go straight into the race, and very much the case in this incident management handbook, We talk about the need to prepare before to be able to do well on the day. We're recognizing that uncertainty is what our world's all about. And for the rest of my life, I've no doubt that's the world that I'll be living in. And so we need to be able to build structures that are agile, adaptive, that empower people to make decisions where there's no previous protocol or no previous solution in place in the world of high uncertainty. And recognizing that good incident management means we're forward-leaning. We're seeing risks early. We are practically getting ready for those. We saw many businesses here in Australia prior to January 2020 already taking measures to prepare for that pandemic that came. They were leaning forward quite early in the piece. It needs to build our confidence of our people, the capability of our people to operate in high stress environments, the high levels of uncertainty, making decisions when the right decision maybe isn't very clear and we have to go for the least bad decision. Maybe that's about having good exercise and simulations, building procedures that guide us to make those choices, getting our people ready for that before an event. We need to empower our people to make decisions, have that authority and clarity about what is the right decision for the organisation. Next one, as Marilyn Monroe would have said, it's your 4 a.m. friends that count. Those people you can make a phone call to at 4 a.m. who work with you, who actually help you, which is your contractors and those emergency service partners. Very clear on that. We've got all those partnerships in place before we need them. Second last one there, good organisational outcomes. A good disaster can be a good opportunity for an organisation. There are many case studies where organisations have taken a crisis event, managed it very well, built their brand, built their reputation, and achieved many other organisational outcomes in an effective way. That only happens if the preparation's been good and all those things that we've already mentioned. And last of all, of course, it's about having good learning organisations, both learning from ourselves but learning from others who, so many different case studies I could point to on the web where organisations have already experienced many lessons. We should be learning from those, not waiting till we experience those ourselves. So they're the principles that underpinned a lot of our thinking as we went forward. Next slide, please. We recognise that good preparation builds a good team, builds a good response capability. And that good preparation includes those risk assessments, building friendships with stakeholders, building those sort of relationships that encourage good open discussion. Incident management structures that build clarity of responsibility, clarity of role, that may in some cases be a new structure to the business as usual structure, or may be built upon and based on the business as usual structure. But the key part there is what we see in studies over and over again of high performance teams, their good role clarity. People know what their responsibilities are, and it should be clearly stating that. Good facilities, both actual and virtual, also, of course, fit into there. And what we know is that one of the challenges is good physical facilities mean regularly used physical facilities. Walk into a room you've never been in before to be part of an incident management team just adds to stress levels because there's lots of uncertainty about the context that we're walking into. And of course, we know that uncertainty causes fear and stress reaction and pushes our decision-making down. Mutual aids there, of course. We see a good example, for example, in the Australian water industry, who have deployed water industry resources across Australia and into New Zealand to be supportive of each other. All industries have these sorts of opportunities through their contractors and their suppliers and their industry groups. And last, of course, exercise and simulations that build the ability to cope with uncertainty, that build the ability to be able to work in high stress environments and build a team capability where the team know each other, where the team can rely on each other, can trust each other, and perform at their very highest. And good exercise and simulations bring those outcomes. The challenge is, of course, getting organisations to commit to those harder levels of exercise programs. So we saw that all of these things help build a capability before we get to the actual starting block. They're done in the weeks and months and years before an event occurs, so that we can be up and running when the time is actually required. Next slide, please. We then looked at some of, and again, the book's got far more detail that I can cover here, but we looked at what are some of the sound practices that we see in a response across organisations. I've already mentioned this one about early warning systems, whether it be, for example, water companies who look at weather forecasts to determine the need for for greater water supply demands on hot days, whether it be international companies who were tracking the COVID outbreak well before January 2020. Those early warning systems allow us to actually detect an actual disruption coming towards us, whether it be a flood event, a bushfire event, or a supply chain problem. And there's been many of those, including things like the chip shortage of the last couple of years. All these things, forward-leaning companies, forward-leaning businesses are on the alert for. They're doing that, horizon scanning, look for the weak signals of incoming threats. Therefore, they can step forward and be ready for those, raise their level of readiness to be able to respond effectively if they have to. This next two I find are really important, and in the work I do across the world, working with organisations in training, etc., is you see that often find in an actual debrief, there's been a poor situational awareness amongst the incident management team. No common operating picture, which means they can't make decisions in a unified way. They're all seeing something different. They're all only seeing part of the problem. And we certainly emphasise in the handbook that good incident management requires processes to be in place so people do have good situational awareness. They do have a good common operating picture. They know what's happening, be able to make their actual decisions based upon. And I have to say, from all the debriefs I've been running the last 12 months, this is particularly important in virtual operations where this is so much harder to actually do. Briefings is an important one, having clear structures around that and having a consistent briefing process. Short, sharp briefings too are quite important. We see that, for example, the research tells us that regular huddles or short briefings add great value to the actual performance of a team. There's a good metadata study out just recently. Clear structures and clear role clarity. What am I accountable for? Who in my team I'm working with? What are the different responsibilities? And what we see, of course, is, again, and recent metadata studies showed that high performance teams have their specialties, but they reach in and use those specialties very, very well because they understand what each part of the incident management team's specialty is, and they utilize that very, very well. And those structures so people know who they need to get information from, who they're reporting to. How does it fit into the org, to the day-to-day business structure? How does it report to the CEO or the senior executive team? How does the board get told what's going on? That's your crisis management arrangements at the top, but the incident management team needs to feed into that. Being clear on having clear operational rhythms. That's regular timing for situation reports, or regular timing for meetings or briefings, or executive briefings and other things. What we know is those patterns reduce stress levels. If we can see the pattern of the day or the pattern of the shift, then that helps us to understand what we need to be doing, know our timeframes, and again helps us manage those stress levels and get better decision making, better understanding of what's going on. We touch on things like information alerts and warnings, for example, with product recalls or water quality issues. And the last one there, of course, who do we need to talk to? How do we need to talk to them? How regularly do we need to talk to them? And what methodology should we be using to talk to different parts of our community, to different stakeholders, to regulators, to other industry peers when an event happens? All that's covered there. So as you can see in that, there's a lot in a good response, and we've got much more detail in the handbook. And some of that you'll say, that's what we have in the emergency services sector. So that's so true, because we've learnt some of these lessons. What we're trying to do is bring that back into general organisational incident management. Next slide, please. We've included into the handbook this section on dynamic planning. This is about issuing forecasts and forecast scenarios, so we understand the range of possibilities the future holds. But we did bring in the CAS product. Now, some of you may not be aware, but the Australian government, and you can download this from the web, have a crisis appreciation and strategic planning handbook. And you can download that. We just include that as a tool that gets you thinking about all the consequence management issues. And what we're really saying in there is saying, when we have an event, we need to be consequence thinking, saying to ourselves, we've got an event happening. What's the full range of consequences that come out of this event? And what are the consequence ripples that come out of that? And then we can start planning forward through those consequences, working out how to actually manage those and seeing subsequent consequences after that. So we've included the CASP handbook to give a tool to those who might not have an existing methodology for actually doing that. But really saying in this section, dynamic planning is important. We need to be looking ahead, but also realizing there's not only one pathway ahead. And the world, the high VUCA context like we're in, there's many pathways ahead. And good forecasting recognizes there's a range of possibilities that come out of an event and a range of consequences that need to be managed. Next slide, please. In this one, again, because we're not talking about a community context, but an organisational context, we looked at recovery being around our people, our trust, our reputation, our assets, restoration of equipment, etc. Could include rebuilding facilities that have been damaged. It could include drying out facilities, a whole range of things, but getting our organisations back to whatever the new condition of running is going to be. And many organisations will use a crisis event or a large sort of an incident to actually transition some of the things that they're doing. But it really recognises that in there we talked about the continuous improvement and lessons management, saying that good organisations that are good get good because they learn. They learn from their previous events, they learn from their industry peers, they learn from other industry sectors. So they're constantly becoming stronger through that learning cycle, building a good learning organisation mindset. And we talk about that there. And what we've done throughout the handbook is provide links to other AIDR handbooks. For example, there's a lessons management handbook, and that links to that. And you'll find throughout the handbook, there's many links to other documents that provide good ideas and good solutions to some of the issues required for effective incident management. Next slide, please. We purposely added this section on incident management team capability. And in the handbook, we've actually put in some work that was published in the AGEM, that's the Australian Journal of Emergency Management. We've extracted from that some information. It's looking at that good incident management team capability requires work to build that. And just because someone might be a good manager day to day does not mean they're going to be a great manager under stress and pressure, where they don't have time to read reports, information is uncertain, the right solution is not clear, and that's a very different context of leadership. Now, we've just picked a couple of things here to talk about, really saying, in the workbook, we talk about 3 areas. They're model leadership and teamwork. That is, they can build good psychologically safe workplaces. They're good at questioning. They're good at intellectual curiosity. They know they don't know everything. And in a VUCA world, we don't know everything. We're facing problems we've never seen before. And so to solve those, we need to engage with people, draw their idea, draw their knowledge in to be able to solve all those problems. That's the first one. How do we establish the team environment, the leadership environment that provides great outcomes? The second one there is about planning and thinking in a strategic way. And this is doing things like sense making sense of a situation, and then think about the consequences of a situation and working through that. And we've seen, for example, in the far too regular cyber breaches of major corporations in Australia in the last year, the time it takes to make sense of what's happened, to really understand the scale of data theft, understand what the consequences of that data theft means, and what then happens after that. And we've seen regulatory changes, we've seen a whole range of things. So planning and thinking strategically, seeing the journey ahead, seeing the unfolding cone of possibilities. And the third one there is this one around self-awareness, that and often referred to as meta leadership. And Harvard have a program on this, and looking at that, in fact, the leaders today need to manage so much. They need to manage themselves. They need to be able to lead the people that are under their supervision. They need to be able to lead upwards to the people above them. They need to be able to lead sometimes beyond people they don't even see, but their influence leads those actual people. So there's our challenge in our modern world when there's a leadership in an incident is difficult and complex. And we went through the cycle of introducing across Canada, New Zealand, America here, incident management systems, but they're just a system. They only perform well when the people facilitating that system perform well. And this is what this is talking about. So, and I have to say at this point that, AIDR has provided some great leadership here with their masterclass series, looking at working under stress and pressure, emotional intelligence and background conditions we need to set for good teams, and critical thinking. And that's all embedded in those sort of programs that AIDR runs. And we thank you for that. Just to finish up, really, to say that you might not have noticed, but there's also 8 case studies on the website. So when you download the handbook, and we know a lot of people have, if you scroll down the page about a screen's worth down, you'll see 8 incident management case studies. 8 very kind organisations volunteered to create a case study of how their organisation's applying the principles that we've talked about. And a vast range of organisations, from government and non-government, from universities to chain stores, quite a wide breadth there. And I think reading those is really important to get a good understanding of possibilities, because there's no one single solution here. There's no one single incident management structure. There's no one single method to be used. Every industry has its own needs, and every organisation has its own operating context. And they would be a very helpful read. I'm going to stop talking and let my colleagues have their say, and really looking forward to the questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Enthralling. VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Sounds like a normal day around here, but really great way of contextualizing what we're working in. So I'd now like to, as David has said, there are a range of case studies. So we thought we would get into the weeds and introduce those two case studies. So I'm going to call on Colin Muller, as you can see there, the Business Resilience Manager for ABC, to talk about how they have applied incident management in their context. Colin,
Thanks,
over
John.
to you.
Thanks, John, and hello from the lands of the Paramount people in South Australia's Adelaide Hills. And thanks to David for his insights into how he's developed the handbook and how we can take something that is effectively lessons learned historically from paramilitary and military organisations, and how we can apply that in our VUCA world. So the ABC is not a military organisation. No surprises there. When I moved across from 20 years in the military to 10 million years in an engineering organisation, and I landed in the ABC, I was very surprised to learn that their culture was not that of a very structured and disciplined arrangement in incident and disruption management. So my role was to set up those organisational resilience arrangements, and the organisational resilience standard had just been released in its ISO format, and I'd been working in South Australia's incident management arrangements through the Emergency Management Centre and the South Australian Water Corporation. So I had a fair understanding of how it worked in paramilitary organisations and well-structured engineering organisations. So I had enough time to understand what the ABC was about and what the ABC was in its culture. And the creative people of the ABC had a motto, and that motto was, "You can't tell me to do that, I work for the ABC." So my first challenge was, right, how do I get these people to work with me? So my first real feat was to create my 4 a.m. friends. David Parsons mentioned the 4 a.m. friends. David Joyce is my manager. And my first challenge was to bring my manager along on the journey of the 4 a.m. friends. We needed not only managers to come along on that journey, but we need to then filter the managers from the leaders. So at 4 a.m., who are the leaders I call to gather the subject matter experts in my incident management team? And who are the managers I call to organise management of the incident to manage up? I need leaders to get the subject matter experts to respond to the technology disruption we're dealing with at the time. I need managers to manage up to make sure that we continue to get content to TV. And then we had the whole of the COVID thing land, and lo and behold, wasn't that a thing to deal with? In the world of broadcasting and content creation, keeping something like Play School on TV was quite challenging, because we had to create what we called COVID bubbles, where a TV production team would move in and around our ABC buildings with a space of 1.5 metres from all of the rest of the production team as they were moving about different entries and exits from the building. So our leaders and managers of the different content teams and production teams working, all coordinating around the incident management teams, and all being applied through an organisation that were full of creative people, totally averse to any formatted structure. Remember, these people can't be told to do anything because they work for the ABC. But we had to apply the principles of incident management. So the principles laid down in this incident management handbook are those that can be applied laterally and liberally if you just adapt the culture of your organisation, see how it fits to this incident management handbook, and then use an element of common sense, find your 4 a.m. friends, understand that network, build that trust, and then understand who your subject matter experts are. And the most important thing I can say out of all of that is that post-event, understand that you need to do your debriefs, because from the debrief, you do your evaluation. Once you've done your evaluation, then you can build your continuous improvement circle. And I will leave it there, because otherwise I will talk nearly as long as David Parsons has. And I will hand back to John, who will introduce our next speaker, and feel free to ask any questions from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Great to see this intersection between sort of the structural and the creative. I'm sure we can explore that a little bit more in the questions. But now I want to invite Muriel Leclercq, who's the Principal for Corporate Incident Management for the Water Corporation in WA, to talk to us about her case study and how this sort of applies in a highly kind of technical, but also essential service environment. So Muriel, over to you.
Hello from the Whadjuk Noongar land in Western Australia. Thanks, John, and also thank you for the opportunity to present our case study on how Water Corporation applies incident management. So my approach for this presentation is really to relate our experiences to a few of the incident management principles as outlined in the handbook and also mentioned by David earlier today. By way of background, Water Corporation is the principal supplier of water, wastewater, drainage and bulk irrigation services to homes, businesses and farms across Western Australia. We directly employ about over 3,800 people, and we provide high level of expertise, and have a strong commitment to our customers, community and the state. Interestingly, we actually manage about $44 billion worth of assets to deliver water services across 2.6 million square kilometres. So as you can appreciate, trying to standardise incident management across the corporation has its challenges. So there are many similarities to government agencies in how we use incident management, but there are some fundamental differences. So firstly is the application of incident management. As a government trading enterprise, we approach incident management in two ways. On the one hand, it's externally facing when we interact with our emergency services colleagues, such as police and fire services, when responding to things such as bushfires, floods, cyclones, or hazardous material incidents. But on the other hand, as David mentioned, we have this whole realm of internally facing incidents when we need to manage the different incident types, which could range from operational security, information technology, OSH incidents, environmental incidents, which includes dangerous goods and wastewater overflows, public safety, customer and community issues, as well as operational incidents such as asset failures or water quality issues. So we have applied the AIMS methodology to our incident management doctrine, which flows through to our crisis information management system, which is where we OC. So whilst we acknowledge that we need to align AIMS when interacting externally with the other emergency services, so we're speaking the same language, we have had some challenges in embedding AIMS to manage internally facing incidents. So this could be because we're not a command and control organisation. As a private entity, management is not authoritarian, which seems to be the approach of AIMS. Also AIMS, which is a system for the management of mostly externally facing incidents, uses terminologies and methodologies that are not part of everyday life. So trying to apply the AIMS concepts such as functional management can be difficult for our people because they don't use concepts such as intelligence or logistics routinely, and the term planning in our world relates to asset management. But that said, we are keen to explore the exemplar of using existing functional business units for example, people in safety, customer services, asset and networks, ICT and finance, as illustrated on page 6 in the handbook, as an alternative to using the AIMS functional structures of intelligence, planning and logistics. The second key difference in how we manage incidents is customers and communities. Although AIMS does consider community interaction, it's silent on customers. And I guess because community rather than customers are the focus of emergency services. However, customers are of significant focus and importance to the private sector. So during external emergencies or internal incidents, our customer team develops specific customer care packages for those impacted. So such as making sure that customers are not charged for the water they use if they're fighting bushfires or during declared heat waves. Our customer teams are an integral part of our incident management approach, so much so that we've actually amended our current lessons management coding from POSTI, which is the People, Process, Organisation, Support, Technology, Training and Exercise, to POST-TECH, with the C at the end being customer and community, as we feel it important to capture incident learnings relating to our customers. So principle 2 of the handbook, incident management enhances existing arrangements, certainly resonates with our approach. The last difference that I want to highlight is the way we manage risk and lessons. Our corporation has incorporated incident management within risk management framework as disruption risk or risk realized. So disruption risk incorporates incident, emergency, and crisis management. And we are now looking at incorporating risk management at the front end of incident management, that is at the incident declaration and classification stage. So by assessing the incident and scanning the business for direct and consequential impacts and risks will allow the right business functions to be included in incident response and will also guide the development of appropriate incident objectives. We are also exploring the concept of incorporating risk at the back end of incident management, that is at the post-incident review phase, by using risks and controls as a means of coding lessons rather than capability, which fundamentally is a control. That way we can assess if the corporation has identified the right risks and controls to manage incidents and determine if the incident may have occurred as a result of a failed or absent controlled. So subsequently, incident review recommendations would be referred back to the risk or control owner to remediate. So principle 3, incident management requirements are risk-based, and principle 11, incident management requires continuous improvement, also resonates with the Water Corporation's approach to incident management. In closing, another feature that we have found interesting in the handbook is the STIC briefing protocol, which is the situation, task, incident, concern, and calibrate, listed on page 14. This briefing format seems to align better to an executive audience than the SMEAC format, which I understand is paramilitary in origin. So in summary, I just want to say thank you for developing this manual. We really appreciate the lens of a non-government organisation and are keen to incorporate the concepts into our incident management approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Muriel, and thanks for giving us those insights, particularly from a business, or as they say, corporatized sort of world. And I think that that's really important. We tend to forget that there are other stakeholders. I want you to put your virtual hands together for all of our panelists, and just some great insights there. And now we'll go to questions. We've got one question here. I've got a couple of others as well, but feel free to populate the Q&A section, because we certainly there's plenty of time left for us to answer questions, and I will try and keep David and Colin under control. But yeah, this question is actually for Muriel, and it's from Gareth Alsop. So Gareth is asking, so understand and can relate the application of aims in a non-combat agency and particular asset or consumer or customer focus. So Gareth is interested in understanding if you've adopted aims for external combat agency liaison, where you might have to represent in some functional capacity in a functional area. And then have you looked at a more suitable process structure to suit individual business requirements when managing internal incidents?
So I was just going to have to read the back end of that one, and
Yeah.
then looked at more sensible, suitable processes and structures to suit business requirements. Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the back end of that question, but certainly I can, answer the front end. So we do have. We're not a hazard management agency or a combat agency in the emergency management world. So we're really there to support, to provide water and wastewater services. But obviously with our interaction with our emergency or emergency management partners, we do have to be speaking the same language. So that in that way, which is why I sort of mentioned that we had applied the aims methodology to all of our doctrine. And so in that sense, we can actually, go and sit up in the State Operations Centre as liaison officers and interact in that sense. I think today's case study was more around where the areas that we are struggling for focus as far as the aims, using aims internally into the business, because as I mentioned, it's not day-to-day language, so we do struggle in that sense. So just rethinking how can we make it more relevant and pertinent to our incident managers, while still being true to those principles that you spoke about.
Great, thanks, Muriel. I might pose a question to David, and this sort of also takes in, I guess, your managing uncertainty work that you do as well. So I think in my experience, I've sort of often seen either inexperienced managers or leaders or somebody thrust into a particular role want to introduce their own way of managing things because they're comfortable with that. That's what they're comfortable with, and yet we have spent a lot of work in putting in place the incident management principles. So I would be interested in your reflections on how do you manage that tension when you have to. There may not be a direct report, and you have to potentially manage that up.
Okay, look, you've identified an issue I hear a lot, I have to say, particularly when people are moving between organisations which have different incident management processes. And it's a real issue because the last thing people need when they're under stress is to have different ways of working imposed on them. It just elevates their stress levels, which pushes their performance downwards. And I think that comes to the challenge of the maturity of an organisation having a mature process. I know Water Corp does. And where if I was to go and work at Water Corp, I'd expect that I would be told, here's how Water Corp manages incidents and here's our way of working. And I should adapt to the organisation I'm actually going to. That's a real challenge. That's obviously in the emergency services sector, that's the benefit they've got now with a standard set of arrangements under AIMS is they can work different people between agencies and in principle using the same processes. So certainly I think that is an issue, and it's up to an organisation's leadership, and that's what the leadership team's there for, to provide leadership, and sometimes say this is what we have endorsed, this is the way we work, and you will comply to the way we work. But having swapping and changing during an incident is not the time to be doing that. We need to have certainty about our processes, certainty about the methodologies, and I say it comes up an awful lot, and I've seen it happen. I've been in a room where it's been happening. It doesn't lead to good outcomes. So I think, John, I often come back to when I'm talking to different people, I say sometimes leaders have to lead, and as an executive, that sometimes means setting down organisational procedures and saying this is how we work.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. And yeah, have seen that and experienced that uncertainty as well. And
Yeah.
it's not a pleasant space to be
Yeah.
in. Got a great question here, which I'm going to pose to you, Colin. I think have you got any tips for overcoming organisational resistance to collaborative and embedded emergency management in an organisation where it was previously very siloed?
Siloing is a challenge. I like to call it cylinders of excellence. They're very, very professional ways of getting around siloing. Look, you've got to be gentle. It's your 4 a.m. friends. It's understanding who are the leaders, who are the managers. Don't go and approach the managers and tell them you've got to get rid of the silos. Go to the leaders within that group, and understanding the difference between a leader and a manager is really, really important if you're going to attack the silos. If you're going to get rid of the silo, go from the bottom up. You need support from the top down. There used to be this old book called, I think we've still got it, David, correct me if I'm wrong, AS 50/50, managing disruption related risks. And it said you needed to get a mandate and commitment to implement business continuity management. So that's been a bit of a mantra of mine. Now, if you want to get rid of your silos, you need to have a commitment from the organisation to get rid of those silos, to implement your approach to organisational resilience, whatever that is, or incident management within your organisation. And then you need to do that in a very, very structured way. And it goes in some part to that next question there, which is talking about how do you do the training. For me, the training has been part of our induction program, is a short online training pack, which is just to say, this is incident management in the ABC. These are the principles we apply, and this is how it looks. And this is our structure of tier 1, 2, 3. And if you're invited to join in, this is what you'll be expected to do. So if you set that standard of incident management and organisational resilience from the day you join the organisation, later on, it's not today, you won't reap the rewards of that today, that silo still exists today, but in 3 years' time, it'll be less. I hope that sort of addresses that question or a couple of those in a way.
And
Yeah,
Colin mentioned,
that's great.
Sorry, John, to jump in. Colin mentioned about tying into that other question about around the training one. And I think that it does all tie together to a degree, because if you look at the principles in the Incident Management Handbook, many of them are about organisational culture. For example, we've got a continuous improvement mindset. Well, some organisations have that and some just don't. Forward leaning. Some organisations just react when things happen, don't have a culture of scanning horizons, being forward leaning, shaping their actual world that they're working. So part of the challenge is that one about the principles. Many of those are embedded in the organisation's day-to-day culture, the day-to-day attitudes and values of the organisation. The second part I just want to comment about that one is to say that it sort of ties to that question, implies there's going to be some training. And I just want to talk about the combination between training and exercises. Exercises can build good outcomes if there's been training beforehand, so people know what they're supposed to do when strengthening that actual training, and we're strengthening what they were trained in. But if we don't train people first and just throw them into an exercise, they practice bad behaviours possibly. And the challenge is, under stress and pressure, you use recall to solve problems. And if you've stored in your mind a bad way of operating, you'll pull that out. So we need to train before an exercise. Here's the procedures. Let's practice these procedures, train exercise on those, and then embed those into the person's memory, which is why defence and police and others do lots of drills, lots of exercises to store the right recalls. And that takes a well thought through plan.
Yeah, thanks, David. And it is that, as you say, it's that embedding. It's why we do the the evacuation patter on planes every time we go on the plane. It's just about embedding that. And Muriel, I'm going to continue on the training question, because there's it's a question here about what's a quick way to train or support new people in learning emergency management principles?
I think the applicability. So if you can sort of provide practical examples of how the principles apply, and have that consistency, I think that would certainly go a long way, because people will tend to follow the rules if they understand the rules. And to me, and obviously, and then embedding that again, absolutely 100% with what David was saying is, so you build the processes, then you train, and then you exercise, and then it goes back through lessons management. So having a consistent approach, and for sure, I think that's the best way.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Do
Muriel.
you want to jump on that one too, John? Because Muriel made some
Yeah.
great points there, which ties to Shane Bolton's post there. The
Yeah.
challenge is too, though, to train our people to be adaptive, not just replicate past as well. And if your world of uncertainty that we're in, we don't know if tomorrow we're going to be told there's some crisis coming into Australia that we've not been told about before. Let's take foot and mouth disease. All our lives are going to change. All our lives, all our business is going to change. So it's also about recognizing we need to build adaptive capacity, which is using existing processes but challenging unforeseen circumstances we've not talked about before. And I would be quite confident to say that I bet Muriel's thinking about, or has maybe already done, discussion scenarios around things like foot and mouth disease that will impact her business greatly. So it's also, we've got to stretch people to think about, how do I work using my previous process, but in an event I've never even thought about.
Yeah.
And if I may reply to that as well, and I think our journey down the path of linking embedding risk into incident management, I think, is exactly that. So if we do come across a scenario that we are unsure of, we go back straight into the risk management to see, or the risk assessment, to see where the biggest risks are, and which areas of the business are going to be impacted, and then we bring together, using the principles and a structure, to manage that.
Great. There's a great question here from Dale, and it's for, sorry, Colin, do you want it over?
Yeah, I've read Dale's question, and there are some of our audience members who I've participated in exercise writing teams with. And Dale, your answer is quite simply, grab the manager of the team, place him on your exercise writing team, so he is no longer the manager of that team. Get him to help you write the exercise, and then stress test his team with that business continuity plan and evaluate that plan. I can guarantee you that all of his preconceived ideas will go out the window, and all of the thumbs up there suggest to me that many people have done this. I've done it just recently, our corporate cybersecurity plan. I'm told it's fabulous, and anyone who knows anything about cybersecurity knows that cybersecurity is just the fence. What happens when they get past the fence is all IT continuity, and that's what we don't really understand completely, is IT continuity damage. Cyber is just the fence. And I think at a conference I was at the other week, we should start calling cybersecurity what it is. It's cyber theft, which should be dealt with by cyber police and AFP. Anyway, I'll get off that high horse and leave that alone. But yeah, great question, Dale. Call those people out for what it is, run an exercise, and take the manager off the line and let the team run with it.
Any other reflections on that? I agree with you. I think we started talking about it, cyber harm rather than cyber security, because it's it has significant harm.
The key point there, Colin said, which is so true, and I've said it so many times, you take the person out of being involved in responding to the problem, get them to help write the problem, and all of a sudden you hear about all these problems that they haven't talked about before. And all of a sudden they're open to how unrobust the system might be. It's good.
Yep.
We've really haven't got a lot of time and there's still a bunch of great questions here. And I'm trying to pick one that we could spend hours answering some of these. Okay, you each have a minute to answer this question. What's some of the most interesting incidents you've had to manage, and why? 1 minute each. Your time starts now.
I'll quickly jump in. We burnt down 10 houses one afternoon. That's a challenge.
Okay, yeah. Colin.
the ABC, what an interesting beast to work with, coming from paramilitary organisations and having to respond to personalities. So what did you only gave me a minute. I'm thinking for 30
Yeah.
Oh God. Look, I suppose some of the more exciting ones would be things like flying across the water at 100 feet, having a hydraulic failure light come on and going, oh crap, what I do, and not even talking to anyone else in the flight station, having to lean down and pull the emergency hydraulic disconnect handle before even talking to anyone, to disengage hydraulics and go to fly-by-wire so that you don't wing over and land in the water off the north coast of Australia. That was an exciting moment, not necessarily emergency management or incident management, but it was certainly an exciting moment. And from an IMT point of view, I would say South Australia's State Black event, and some of the participants in this crowd were there. That too was a very, very exciting moment in time to live through, to come out the other side of, and to put into perspective what consequence management means as a lived experience. And I still use that today. Consequence management is almost, if not more important than incident management. Thanks.
Yep. So I think from mine, the dirty C word, COVID. I think being a 1 in 100 year event certainly challenged us, and I think probably challenged every organisation across the world, or a lot of organisations across the world. And talking about that VUCA kind of environment, I think. Even though a lot of people have talked about it, planned for it, I think being involved in that at the start and trying to imagine the unimaginable was very interesting. So we really needed to be agile, use the processes and the systems that we had in place, but yet also do some horizon scanning and thinking outside the square. I think the reason that it was quite interesting is that, to me, I don't think anyone imagined that Australia would be locked down so quickly, and certainly coming from Western Australia, as you know, we got locked down even more. So our hard borders were in place for quite some time, and that created a lot of challenges. So I think for me, learning about the incident, the COVID, and also all of the aspects that we've talked about today about incident management, we really need to be agile to respond to. Thank you.
Thanks, Muriel. And that's all we have time for. It's been a great panel. There's a bunch more really interesting questions out there, which we're not able to get to, unfortunately. So I'd like to thank David, Muriel, and Colin again, sharing their insights and wisdoms and practice, and give them all a round of applause. On behalf of ADA, thanks for joining us. I know across the country and also across the globe, we've got international people. I think somebody asked how many. We've had at least 650 people register, which has been fantastic, and well over half of those attended. You'll get emailed a short survey, so we would love it if you could actually fill it out and give us your feedback on the webinar. It just helps us improve to that continuous learning and improvement to the process. It's been my absolute pleasure to host this fantastic session. And so until next time, stay safe and farewell.